Get out before the investors arrive, old man. You're done here. That's what my own son said to me in the glass-walled boardroom of Reed Mining Corporation, the empire I built from nothing but dust, sweat, and faith. I'm George Reed, 72 years old. 50 years ago, I was a kid from Reno who believed a man's handshake meant more than any lawyer's contract. I started with one rusted pickup, a used drill, and a dream that someday this Nevada dirt would feed families, not just mine, but hundreds of others. And for decades it did. But today, standing across from my son Ryan, all I saw was greed, dressed in a tailored Armani suit. He sat there surrounded by a dozen investors half my age, all grinning, while a slideshow behind him flashed words like modernization, efficiency, global expansion. "Dad," he said, his tone dripping with the kind of politeness that hides cruelty the board has voted. "You're being retired effective immediately. You'll keep your pension, of course." He leaned back in my old leather chair, my chair as if he'd earned the right to fill it. "Pension," I repeated quietly. "Ryan, I built this company. There wouldn't even be a board if I hadn't." He cut me off with a chuckle. "That's exactly the problem. You're still talking like it's 1982. Times change. Investors don't want a sentimental miner talking about grit and loyalty. They want numbers, returns, technology." He gestured toward the window where our new headquarters gleamed over Las Vegas Boulevard. "Look around, Dad. We're not a family business anymore. We're a brand." The men and women in that room laughed softly, not cruelly, but the way people laugh when they think they're witnessing history being made. They thought this was progress. They had no idea they were watching a man bury his father alive. I'd weathered decades of collapses, lawsuits, recessions, even lost my wife Margaret to lung cancer 4 years ago. She used to say Ryan had her ambition, but not her heart. I didn't want to believe her. But sitting there watching him smirk at me across the boardroom table, I finally understood what she'd meant. "You're making a mistake," I said. "This company's soul can't be traded like a stock." Ryan's smile widened. "Soul doesn't pay dividends, Dad. People do." He glanced at his assistant. "Security will escort you out." When the guard, a kid who couldn't have been older than 20, opened the door for me, I didn't argue. I simply picked up my old leather briefcase, the one Margaret gave me for our 25th anniversary, and walked out. As I stepped into the corridor, I caught my reflection in the glass, gray hair, oil-stained hands, and eyes that still burned with something Ryan would never understand: resolve. See, he thought he'd won. He thought this was the end of George Reed's era. But he'd forgotten one crucial thing: the moneymakers in that room owned stock, but I still owned the land. The heart of Reed Mining Corporation, every last grain of gold that built this empire, came from one claim, a small plot outside Tonopah, registered under my name 47 years ago. I never transferred that deed, not even to him. So while he toasted his victory with champagne and camera flashes, I walked to my truck, dust settling on my boots, and smiled to myself for the first time in months. He'd just declared war. And I don't start fights. I finish them. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're tuning in from. Because I want to know. Where are the people who still believe in building something with their bare hands? Not with a spreadsheet. They say when a man loses everything, he finally sees who was really standing beside him. When I left that boardroom, I thought at least Ryan would come to his senses, maybe call, maybe apologize. But pride is a cruel kind of silence. A month later, I found myself sitting in the back seat of a silver Mercedes, the same one the company used to drive me to meetings, except this time, the driver had orders to take me home. Not to my old estate in Palm Springs, of course. Ryan had restructured that into a company guest villa. No, my new home was a beige rental duplex near Reno's Industrial Park, across from a liquor store, and a flickering neon sign that said Motel Laundry. When the driver left, I stood there holding a single cardboard box, a framed photo of Margaret, a few mining maps, and the deed folder with my name embossed in fading gold letters. George A. Reed, Golden Basin Claim. It's funny when you're young, you think success is what fills your hands. When you're old, you realize it's what's left when they're empty. The first week was the hardest. I'd gone from commanding boardrooms to eating microwave dinners in a 2-room unit that smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness. Ryan's lawyers sent over paperwork final compensation agreement, a polite way of saying sign this and disappear. One afternoon, a delivery came a letter embossed with Reed Mining's new logo. Inside just one sentence from Ryan's executive email account. You'll die in debt, old man. It's time to move on. No signature, no emotion, just a digital execution. I sat down at the cheap Formica table, staring at the words until they blurred. My fingers brushed the photograph of Margaret beside the lamp. Her soft smile, that calm steadiness in her eyes that always saw 10 steps ahead. Margaret, I whispered, you'd tell me to fight. But right now, I just want to rest. Then I noticed the folder, the one with my name on it, peeking from the box. It had been years since I opened it. Dust clung to the edges, the paper yellowed with time. Inside was the original title deed to Golden Basin, a forgotten gold mine I'd acquired before Reed Mining even existed. The coordinates jumped off the page like an old friend's voice, Township 4N Range 42E, Tonopah County. Back then, I'd dismissed it as worthless land after a shallow vein dried out. But something in me stirred a gut feeling I'd learned never to ignore. I grabbed my laptop, the same battered Dell I'd used since 2009, and started searching. New geological surveys had reclassified parts of that region for lithium potential. Lithium, the new gold. And according to Nevada records, the claim was still registered under George A. Reed. My pulse steadied. My breath slowed. For the first time in weeks, I felt something powerful, hope with a purpose. If Ryan had taken everything I'd built on the surface, maybe it was time to start digging again. Not for ore, but for truth. That night I sat by the window, the neon glow from the liquor store painting, streaks of red across the table. I opened Margaret's old Bible, the one with her handwriting in the margins, and found a verse she'd underlined years ago, "Be still and know that I am God." I closed my eyes and whispered, maybe that's what faith really is. Maggie, patience tested by time. Because even buried gold eventually sees daylight. And I had a feeling the ground under Golden Basin was about to shake the Reed family again, only this time it wouldn't be me who fell. That night's prayer wasn't for revenge. It was for clarity. For the strength to fight without losing what Margaret once called the dignity of quiet men. By the second week of June, the desert was calling me again. There's a silence out there you can't find anywhere else, a kind of truth that only speaks when the world stops talking. I packed my old Ford F-250, the one with a cracked windshield, and 320,000 miles on it, threw in a thermos of coffee, my maps, and that faded deed to Golden Basin, and headed south toward Tonopah. The sun was just crawling up behind the mountains when the first sign appeared, Reed Mining Development Zone. My son's name plastered across every construction fence, every steel container, every billboard. Even the dust carried his ambition. But about 30 miles past the last sign of asphalt, the desert turned quiet again, my kind of quiet. That's where I found the old dirt road half buried in sand, leading toward the ridge I'd once staked out decades ago. The GPS said I was on private land, my land. And standing there feeling that dry wind on my face, I remembered what it felt like to build something with calloused hands instead of spreadsheets. There was an old trailer parked near the ridge, the kind used by surveyors back in the early 2000s. I knocked, half expecting scorpions to answer. Instead, a familiar voice came from inside. Mr. Reed. When the door opened, I almost smiled. Ethan Morales, former chief engineer, the best driller I ever had, before Ryan cut him loose during his modernization phase. He looked older, beard, gray eyes, still sharp as quartz. Well, I'll be damned, he said. Didn't think you'd ever come back out here. Guess I missed the smell of honest dust, I said. We sat on overturned crates, shared stale coffee, and caught up. Ethan told me he'd been doing freelance geological surveys for private investors, mostly abandoned claims and secondary mineral checks. When I handed him the Golden Basin deed, he whistled low. George, you realize what this is. I know it used to be a dry hole. Not anymore, he said, pulling up his tablet. He showed me a digital overlay from the Nevada Mineral Office, the entire basin now classified under Category L3 lithium potential. Lithium, I repeated. Ethan nodded. The stuff they put in electric car batteries. Prices tripled last year. This claim, if it's still active, could be worth 9 figures easy. I felt my heart steady, not racing, just steady like an engine ready to start again, after years in storage. Still active, I said. I pay the claim renewal tax every 2 years. Habit, I guess. Ethan laughed. Well, that habit might just make you $100 millionaire. We spent the rest of the day testing soil samples, walking the ridgeline, marking coordinates. By sunset, we had the data. The lithium readings were strong, stronger than anything Ryan's company was currently drilling. I leaned against my truck, watching the horizon turn orange. Ethan, I said, how fast can we file a reactivation under a new entity? He rubbed his chin. If the claim's yours, I'd say 48 hours. You planning to sell? I looked toward the horizon again. No. I'm planning to build again. Just smarter this time. That night I drove back to Reno and called an old friend, Catherine Liu, federal mining attorney, the same one who'd helped me file my first corporate charter back in '85. She didn't ask questions, just said, "Come by my office at 8 a.m. sharp. Bring coffee and the deed." When I walked into her office the next morning, I handed her everything: the geological survey, Ethan's report, the original title. She read in silence for a full 5 minutes, then looked up with a faint smile. "George," she said, "you may have just struck the richest revenge in Nevada." She helped me form a new holding company, Reed Legacy Resources LLC, with 100% ownership under my name. No board, no investors, no betrayal. By the time Ryan's PR team was bragging about their upcoming Reed Mining IPO, I had already reactivated Golden Basin's permit and transferred all mineral rights into the new entity. Ryan thought he'd buried his father, but out here in the desert, I'd just dug up his biggest mistake. The last thing Catherine said before I left her office stayed with me. Sometimes justice needs paperwork. Sometimes it just needs patience. And I had both. By the time the invitations hit the press, you'd think Reed Mining had just discovered the cure for gravity. Every financial paper in the country ran the headline, "The next Tesla of mining, Ryan Reed's $480 million IPO." CNBC called him the visionary heir to a blue-collar empire. Forbes used the words, "new blood, new gold." I sat in my rented duplex with the paper spread across the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once taught Ryan how to balance a checkbook. And right there beside the coffee mug Margaret once used, I made a decision: if he wanted to play with Wall Street, then we'd let truth join the game. The Las Vegas Grand Hyatt ballroom was blinding chandeliers, cameras, velvet curtains, and 500 people who believed my son walked on platinum. Everywhere you looked, screens flashed, Reed Mining IPO rising above limits. They had no idea the ground under their feet was about to crumble. Catherine Liu met me in the lobby, calm as a judge. "Are you sure you want to do this publicly?" she asked. "Ryan wanted the cameras," I said. "He can have them." She handed me a black folder. Inside were the reactivation certificates, the lithium test reports, and the new deed for Golden Basin stamped Registered Reed Legacy Resources, LLC. "Timing," I asked. She checked her watch. "He goes on stage in 3 minutes." When the ballroom doors opened, the applause was deafening. Ryan stepped onto the stage like he'd been born for it. Armani suit pocket square, perfect smile rehearsed. Flanked by executives and TV anchors, he took the microphone. "Today," he said, "we launch a new era of mining, sustainable, scalable, and unstoppable." The crowd roared. I slipped quietly to the back beside the press row unnoticed. Ryan's speech rolled like a storm of buzzwords. Lithium reserves in Nevada, unprecedented growth, generational innovation. He was halfway through bragging about exclusive mineral rights across western Nevada when Catherine walked onto the stage. No drama, no music, just a woman in a dark suit carrying a single folder. Ryan blinked. "Excuse me, ma'am, this is a private." She held up a document. "Not anymore." The cameras swung toward her. Murmurs filled the room. "I'm Catherine Liu, federal mining attorney. I represent Mr. George A. Reed, original founder of this company and sole legal owner of the Golden Basin mining claim." The silence was nuclear. "Golden Basin," she continued, "is the primary lithium source underpinning Reed Mining's IPO valuation. However, records show the claim was never transferred to Reed Mining Corporation. It remains privately owned under my client's registered entity, Reed Legacy Resources, LLC. Ryan's color drained from his face. What are you talking about?" he stammered. "That claim is under federal law." Catherine interrupted smoothly. "No company can publicly offer shares based on assets it does not legally control. Therefore, the Securities and Exchange Commission has ordered an immediate suspension of this IPO pending ownership verification." Gasps rippled through the audience. Investors whispered, cell phones lit up, and every camera in the room swung from Ryan to me. Ryan's PR manager rushed forward, whispering frantically, but the microphones caught it all. "This can't be happening," Ryan hissed. "Dad, what did you do?" I stepped forward just enough for the cameras to find me. "Son," I said quietly, "you forgot one thing. You can replace your father on paper, but not on the deed." The room erupted. Flashes burst like fireworks. The moderators tried to regain control, but the crowd smelled blood and money. Catherine handed the SEC representative a copy of the documents, shook his hand, and nodded toward me. "It's done," she said softly. Ryan was still frozen on stage, mouth half open, staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. But what he saw was something much worse, a man he'd underestimated. The next morning, every headline told the same story: Reed Mining IPO halted amid ownership scandal. Father outplays son in 480-minute corporate showdown. And beneath one photo, me walking out of the Grand Hyatt, while Ryan stood behind the podium, pale and stunned. The caption read, "The old lion still has claws." If you're still with me right now, type 1 in the comments. Because the best part of this story hasn't even started yet. What happens next isn't about money. It's about justice. That night, Catherine asked if I felt vindicated. I told her no. The Lord doesn't rush justice, I said. He waits until pride shouts loud enough to collapse on itself. The silence after a scandal is always louder than the scandal itself. 3 days after the Grand Hyatt fiasco, every news channel was playing the same footage: my son standing on stage white as marble while Catherine read the ownership documents to the world. But beneath the headlines and humiliation came something heavier: a lawsuit. Filed by Reed Mining Corporation versus George A. Reed, alleging unauthorized claim interference, fraudulent re-registration of corporate assets, and reputational harm. Reputational harm that one made me laugh out loud. Ryan had taken everything from me but decency, and now he wanted that too. Catherine and I met the following morning in her downtown Reno office, walls lined with certificates and newspaper clippings from landmark mining cases. She poured us both coffee, black and bitter. "This will go federal," she said. "The lithium value puts it under interstate commerce jurisdiction." "Then let's go federal," I replied. "I've been waiting 50 years for a fight that matters." The courtroom in Reno felt like a furnace. Half the state's reporters were there, packed into benches, scribbling notes like vultures, circling the same story: father versus son, the battle for the desert. Ryan entered first, flanked by a team of 6 corporate attorneys from San Francisco, all wearing identical suits and the same smug expression. He didn't look at me once. I could see his pride straining under the weight of embarrassment, his hand twitching at his cufflinks, jaw clenched. When the judge, Honor Meredith Rowe, entered, the cameras went dead silent. "Case 23-417, she said. "Reed Mining Corporation vs. George A. Reed." She looked up at me. "Mr. Reed, you're representing the defendant." "No, Your Honor," Catherine said. "I represent him. The defendant is the rightful owner of the Golden Basin claim." Ryan's lead attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client's company has invested over $80 million in exploration and infrastructure related to Golden Basin. Mr. Reed's so-called reactivation filing constitutes fraud and theft of intellectual property." Catherine didn't even flinch. "Fraud requires intent to deceive counsel. My client simply reactivated a claim that has never once been transferred or surrendered. He paid renewal taxes every 2 years since 1976. I have receipts." She opened a thick binder and began distributing documents to the judge, the clerk, and the opposing table. Ryan's lawyer frowned. "That can't be accurate." "Reed Mining has owned, Your Honor." Catherine interrupted. "With the court's permission, I'd like to submit certified copies of Nevada Tax Form 422 claim renewal issued under the name George A. Reed for Parcel 4N42E, Tonopah County, also known as Golden Basin." The judge scanned the papers, tapping her pen. "These are federal forms, stamped and notarized." Catherine nodded. "We also have bank statements showing automatic payments from Mr. Reed's personal account over 47 years. She glanced at Ryan. "That's called consistency, a trait money can't buy." A ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom. Ryan's face flushed crimson. He whispered something to his lawyer, who shifted tactics. "Your Honor," the man said, "even if the claim technically remains under Mr. Reed's name, all survey work and mineral discovery were financed by Reed Mining. The company's valuation depends on that data." Catherine smiled a small, knowing smile that meant trouble for the other side. "That brings us to Exhibit D." She clicked the remote, and the screen behind her lit up with satellite imagery. "Your Honor, here we have thermal imaging scans of Golden Basin conducted under federal permit by my client's firm, Reed Legacy Resources. These were authorized before Reed Mining's surveys ever began. The images were time-stamped, dated 3 weeks prior to Ryan's first public filings. Catherine continued. Reed Mining's so-called exploration was performed illegally on land that did not belong to them. Judge Rowe leaned back. So you're telling me, Ms. Liu, that the plaintiff's company trespassed on the defendant's federally registered property and then attempted to claim ownership through public offering? That is correct, Your Honor, Catherine said calmly. We also have SEC correspondence acknowledging our ownership claim prior to the IPO suspension. The judge turned to Ryan. Mr. Reed, were you aware of this documentation before launching your company's offering? Ryan hesitated. His lawyer tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand. Answer the question. I thought the claim was part of the company's assets, he muttered. You thought, the judge repeated slowly, but you never verified, no, Your Honor. Her voice hardened. That's not how federal property law works, Mr. Reed. The gavel came down like thunder. Based on presented evidence, this court recognizes the Golden Basin claim as the exclusive property of the defendant, Mr. George A. Reed. All associated rights, revenues, and assets shall remain under his control until further notice. Reed Mining Corporation is hereby enjoined from any operations claims or promotional activity connected to said property. The courtroom exploded in noise, gasps, whispers, and the rapid clicks of 100 cameras. Ryan stood there hollow-eyed, while Catherine quietly gathered her papers. She turned to me and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Reed. You just reclaimed the foundation of your legacy." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. One shouted, "Mr. Reed, how does it feel to beat your son in court?" I paused, adjusted my hat, and said, "It wasn't about beating him. It was about teaching him that a man's signature only means something when it's backed by his character." The next morning's headlines told the world what the gavel already had: George Reed wins federal case, the old miner who outdug his own son. And deep down, I knew the real digging had only just begun. The morning after the court's decision, Reno felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't waking up to someone else's expectations. No board meetings, no polished lies from corporate PR teams, no fake smiles that smelled like champagne and betrayal. Just a cup of black coffee, the desert wind through the cracked window, and the sound of quiet, the kind Margaret used to say was God making space for peace. But peace is something a man has to choose. I drove south toward Carson Valley that afternoon, past the dry ridges, where my wife and I had once built a cabin, the one we used to escape to during the early years of Reed Mining, before success became noise. That's where she was buried. The headstone was simple granite carved with the words, "Loved deeply, worked quietly, believed always." I stood there for a long time, hat in my hands, the sunlight hitting the gold streaks in the stone. When I finally spoke, my voice came out rougher than I intended. "Well, Maggie, I won." The wind picked up, rustling the sagebrush around me like her laugh used to when she couldn't keep a straight face at one of my stubborn rants. "But it doesn't feel like winning," I said. "It feels like standing on a battlefield after everyone's gone home. Empty." I knelt and placed a small velvet pouch on the ground. Inside was a handful of raw lithium ore, dull gray stones. Nothing pretty about them until the light caught just right. "That's from Golden Basin," I whispered. "Turns out the dry land you told me to keep paying taxes on all these years wasn't so dry after all." I smiled, shaking my head. "You were right as usual." Then I told her everything about Ryan's betrayal, about the lawsuit, about Catherine's quiet brilliance in court. I even told her about the moment I saw Ryan's face crumble when the judge read the verdict. And when I got to that part, my voice broke. "I thought I'd feel proud," I said. But watching him break like that, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like failure, mine as a father. The wind slowed. The desert went still again. Its strange silence has a way of answering without words. I closed my eyes and remembered the last thing Margaret said before she died, lying in that hospital bed, too weak to lift her head, but strong enough to lift my heart. George, she'd whispered, if he ever forgets who he is, don't fight him. Show him. Those words had haunted me ever since, and now standing there, I finally understood them. This fight wasn't about money or property. It was about showing Ryan what it truly means to build something that lasts, not an empire, but a conscience. I pulled out my old Bible from the truck, the one Margaret had filled with underlined verses and folded prayers. Inside the front cover, written in her neat cursive, were 7 words. Justice without mercy is still unfinished work. I traced those words with my thumb and felt something shift inside me, a weight loosening. I don't hate him, Maggie, I said softly. I just can't let him destroy everything we stood for. Maybe mercy isn't letting someone off easy. Maybe it's giving them a road back. I poured the lithium stones out onto her grave, their gray edges catching the light until they glowed faintly pink against the sunset. It was my way of saying the earth still gives back when you dig with honest hands. Then I whispered a prayer, not the kind you recite in church, but the kind that grows out of regret and hope mixed together. Lord, teach me to hold power without pride, and to forgive without forgetting. That prayer wasn't for Ryan's success or my own redemption. It was for balance, for the kind of justice that leaves room for grace. Because Margaret had been right, mercy doesn't erase justice. It completes it. When I finally turned to leave, the last of the sunlight was fading over the hills. The desert looked quiet again, not empty, just resting. And for the first time in a long while, so was I. 2 weeks after the court ruling, my phone started ringing again. Reporters, lawyers, venture capitalists, even strangers wanting to buy my story. But I wasn't interested in turning this into a headline. I'd already seen what fame does to a man. It turns his voice into an echo that only answers itself. So when I finally picked up the phone, it wasn't for a reporter. It was for my son. His voice was thin, frayed, a sound I hadn't heard since he was a boy, trying not to cry. Dad, I need your help. 3 words. And for a moment, I didn't know whether to hang up or thank God. We met at a roadside diner outside Carson City neutral ground, quiet enough for truth to find its way through. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow, his confidence gone. The kind of hollow you can't fix with money. I waited until the waitress left before speaking. You look like you've been awake for a week. I haven't slept, he said, staring into his untouched coffee. The SEC froze everything. The investors are suing, the bank's threatening foreclosure on the new site. He swallowed hard. They said I could face criminal charges, securities fraud, false asset disclosure. Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the claim was still yours. I studied him for a long time. The same hands that once played with toy dump trucks now trembled as they gripped a coffee cup. It was strange how a man can destroy everything he built with his father and still come back to him for rescue. You didn't know, I repeated slowly. You had a team of lawyers, accountants, analysts, and a 7-figure salary, but you didn't know. Please, he said quietly. I can't go to prison. I've already lost everything, the company, the condo, the cars, Ashley. He stopped short, voice cracking. She left the night after the verdict. Of course she did, I said. She fell in love with your balance sheet, not your backbone. That hit him. He lowered his head, voice shaking. I deserve that. But please, Dad, help me. You've always known how to fix things. For a long time, I didn't answer. The truth was, I didn't know whether I was staring at my son or at the ghost of the man who'd buried my name under greed. Finally, I said, "If I help you, you do exactly as I say. No lawyers, no excuses, no more pretending to be the victim. You take responsibility in writing and in public." He looked up, desperate. "I'll do anything." I reached into my briefcase and slid a document across the table. "The Reed Legacy Foundation Charter," I said. "You sign this and you transfer every remaining corporate asset, your shares, equipment, patents, trademarks into this foundation." He blinked. "A foundation. That's right. The Reed Legacy Foundation. It'll fund scholarships for mining families, safety programs, healthcare in the desert towns we used to ignore. You say you want redemption? This is where it starts." His eyes filled with tears. "You're taking everything." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Ryan. I'm returning everything to where it should have gone in the first place, back to the people who made it possible." He hesitated, voice trembling. "And what about me?" "That depends on you," I said. "You'll work for the foundation. You'll earn a salary like anyone else, enough to live, not to boast. You'll answer to the same rules you once thought you were above." He stared at the papers, reading slowly, his lips moving as he traced the signature line. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Mom would have liked this," he whispered. That's when I knew he'd sign. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking, and wrote his name beneath mine, the first time our names had shared the same page since the day he fired me. When he slid the papers back, I folded them carefully and said, "Welcome back to the family business, son. Only this time, it's not about mining gold. It's about mining character." We walked out of the diner together, the sunset spilling gold over the highway. Ryan stood beside his car, staring at the desert horizon. "How did you stay calm through all this?" he asked quietly. "Because I've seen storms before," I said. "And I know which ones you can't outrun, the ones inside you." He nodded, eyes wet, voice barely audible. "Then maybe it's time I stop running." That night, as I filed the transfer documents, I realized this wasn't revenge anymore. It was reckoning, not punishment, but correction. And sometimes correction hurts more than any sentence a judge can hand down. 3 months later, the desert no longer felt like exile. It felt like resurrection. The paperwork was done, the lawyers quiet, the foundation approved by the state and the IRS. The Reed Legacy Foundation, 3 simple words that now owned what greed once tried to claim. But this time, the profits weren't going to investors. They were going to people. The first morning I drove out to Golden Basin. The sun was rising behind the ridge, painting the sand a deep red gold. Rows of new safety rigs gleamed in the light. Workers in reflective gear, most of them locals, were clocking and joking, swapping coffee cups. The sound of drills mixed with laughter. That was the music I'd missed. Ryan was already there. Not in a suit. Not behind a desk. In a hard hat, jeans, and a high-visibility vest with dust on it. He was hauling cables with a team of younger men, his face sunburned, his hands raw. When he saw me, he wiped the sweat off his forehead and smiled, not the camera smile, but the real one. "Morning, Dad," he said. "You're early." "I used to start my shifts at 5:30, I replied. "You're late." He laughed, and for a moment the years between us disappeared. Inside the new operations trailer, the walls were covered with maps, safety charts, and a simple framed quote above the main desk. "Integrity is the only mineral that never runs out." Catherine Liu stopped by, clipboard in hand. "Good news," she said. "We just closed our first contract with an EV battery supplier. 1-year deal, $80 million in gross revenue, all earmarked for reinvestment." I raised an eyebrow. "You're sure this won't attract the wrong kind of attention?" She smiled. It already did. But this time, attention means opportunity. Ryan listened quietly, nodding. Catherine, I want to thank you. You could have left me to drown. She gave him a long, appraising look. Redemption looks better on you than arrogance ever did. He laughed awkwardly, and I caught myself smiling. I hadn't heard someone talk to him like that since Margaret. By late afternoon, the desert heat shimmered off the machinery. I stood with Ryan on the ridge watching the excavation teams pack up for the day. You know, he said, it's funny. When I was running Reed Mining, I thought leadership was about power. Now I realize it's about permission, people giving you the right to lead them because they trust you. I nodded. Power's heavy. You have to carry it with clean hands or it'll crush you. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, I didn't deserve a second chance, Dad. None of us ever do, I replied. We just make use of the ones we get. He looked out toward the horizon. Sometimes I wish Mom could see this. I put a hand on his shoulder. She can. She just doesn't need to tell us what to do anymore. A week later, we held the Foundation's first community event, the Reed Legacy Scholarship Program. 50 kids from mining towns across Nevada stood in front of the stage wearing hard hats, 3 sizes too big, holding certificates with their names printed bold. Ryan gave the opening speech. Mining runs in veins, not just in rocks, he said. It's in the grit, the hope, and the faith of families who work so others can live better. This foundation is about honoring that spirit. His voice cracked near the end, and I saw a few men in the crowd nod knowingly. The kind of nod only fathers understand. When it was my turn to speak, I said, This ground has given us wealth more than once. But the real treasure isn't what we dig out, it's what we build after we find it. The crowd applauded, the sun dipped low, and for the first time, I felt like the Reed name had been restored to its rightful meaning, not a symbol of power, but of perseverance. That evening, I locked up the office alone. On the wall behind the desk hung my old miner's helmet, battered paint-chipped initials GR barely visible. I hung a new one beside it, freshly engraved RR, father and son. Old and new. Both part of the same mine. As I switched off the lights, I noticed something above the door, a small plaque Catherine had ordered without telling me. It read, Faith, Work, Legacy. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it again. A year passed. The desert, once dry and empty, had turned into a living monument of second chances. Where there used to be silence and rusted machinery, now stood solar arrays, upgraded drills, safety stations, and a new training center with a copper sign that read, Reed Legacy Foundation, built on work run on honor. That morning, the air was crisp, the kind that makes a man breathe deeper, and remember he's still alive. CNBC had sent a crew to film a feature called The Miner Who Outdug Wall Street. They wanted to talk about business, about redemption, about the miracle turnaround that made headlines. But to me, it wasn't a story about money. It was a story about mercy. The reporter, a young woman named Clara Jensen, met me inside the operations office, the same room where I once signed away everything, and later signed it all back. The walls now carried both helmets, mine and Ryan's, side by side. She smiled politely. Mr. Reed, viewers love your story, the betrayal, the courtroom victory, the father-son reconciliation. How does it feel to have it all back? I chuckled. All back, no ma'am. I don't have everything back. I have what matters left. She tilted her head. And what's that? Respect, I said. The kind you can't inherit, can't buy, can't fake. The kind you either earn or lose forever. Clara nodded, sensing the weight in my tone. She gestured toward Ryan, who was outside with the scholarship kids, teaching them how to inspect soil samples. Your son works here full-time now, doesn't he? 6 days a week, I said. He starts at dawn, eats dust, fixes rigs, and never complains. Funny thing, he's never been happier. Do you think people can truly change? She asked. I smiled. Only when they've been broken enough to see what was holding them together all along. After the interview, we stepped outside. The wind rolled through the basin like a long sigh of relief. The kids were laughing, their boots kicking up trails of dust that sparkled in the afternoon light. Ryan was explaining something to a young girl named Elena, maybe 12 or 13, her hard hat too big for her head. He knelt down to her level, showing her how to read mineral samples. She looked up at him like he hung the moon. I felt something loosen inside me again, that quiet kind of pride that sneaks up on you after years of holding your breath. Clara's cameraman asked if I could stand with Ryan for a photo. He waved, grinning like a man who'd finally stopped running from himself. When she snapped the shot, I put my arm on his shoulder and whispered, "You finally look like her." He blinked. "Like Mom, yeah," I said. "Like someone who believes work should mean something." That night after the crew left, we sat on the porch of the main cabin. The desert spread out before us, miles of gold, silver, and lithium veins, glimmering faintly under the moonlight. Ryan handed me a framed brass plaque. On it were engraved words he'd chosen himself, "Legacy built on honesty." In memory of Margaret Reed, whose faith built what greed almost destroyed. I ran my fingers over the cold metal, my throat tight. "She'd be proud," I said. He looked down, his voice low. "I just want to live like I'm worthy of her name and yours." "Then keep showing up," I said. "Every day. Do the work. That's all legacy ever asks of a man." We sat in silence for a while, watching the horizon glow faintly pink where the sun would rise again. When the first light touched the desert, Ryan said softly, "You know, Dad, I used to think success meant being untouchable. Now I know it means being accountable." I smiled. "Took you long enough." He laughed, and for the first time in years, it sounded like music instead of armor. The next morning, the foundation awarded its 100th scholarship to the daughter of a miner who'd lost his leg in an accident years ago. As I handed her the certificate, I realized what redemption really meant, not undoing the past, but rebuilding something stronger from its wreckage. The cameras clicked, the applause echoed, and I caught Ryan's eyes in the crowd. He didn't need to say it, and neither did I. We both knew the gold we'd been looking for all along wasn't buried underground. It was right here, standing in front of us. 1 year to the day after that courtroom gavel fell, I stood once again on the ridge above Golden Basin, the same ground where my father's shovel first struck rock, the same place my son once tried to bury my name. Now it was alive again, not just with machines and miners, but with people who believed in what we'd built. The Reed Legacy Foundation had grown into something far greater than a business. It had become a community, a living story of forgiveness, faith, and rebirth. Down below, the evening sun painted everything in gold. The drills had stopped for the day, and workers were gathered around the outdoor stage where a small brass plaque gleamed under the lights. It read, "In honor of those who remembered that dignity is worth more than gold." A soft desert wind swept across the ridge, and for a moment I could almost hear Margaret's voice again, that calm, steady warmth that could turn even failure into courage. "George," she used to say, "when the world breaks, you don't rebuild taller. Rebuild truer." That's what this whole story had been about. Ryan joined me, his boots dusty, his shirt streaked with sweat and pride. "They're all waiting for you, Dad," he said, smiling. "The board wants a few words before we close the day." "The board," I chuckled. You mean the minors, the teachers, and the scholarship kids? That's the only board I ever want. We walked down together, father and son, side by side, and as the workers clapped, I realized the applause wasn't for me. It was for us. I took the microphone and looked out over the crowd, the welders, the engineers, the students, the families. I used to think wealth was measured in acres and ounces, I began. But I've learned that the real currency of a man's life is trust. And when that's broken, no amount of gold can buy it back. The audience went quiet. Ryan stood just behind me, his eyes steady, no guilt, no arrogance, just gratitude. I tell this story, I continued, not because it makes me look strong, but because it shows how weak I once was, how blind I became to what mattered. I let ambition raise a son and forgot to raise a man. A few people in the crowd nodded, eyes wet. That's what greed does. It doesn't destroy what you have. It makes you forget what you love. I paused, letting the words settle like dust after a storm. And yet, even when family breaks apart, faith can build again. You see, people think family drama stories are just gossip, something to fill tabloids and talk shows. But the truth is, family drama stories are what make us human. They remind us that love can survive betrayal, that forgiveness can outlast pride, and that dignity doesn't die just because someone stops believing in it. And if you're watching this, maybe you're living your own family drama stories right now. I want you to hear me clearly. You can start over. You can draw a line, take a breath, and choose to rebuild truer. Because the moment you stop letting pain define you, you start defining yourself. When the applause came, it wasn't loud. It was soft, like a promise being kept. Ryan stepped forward and handed me a sealed envelope. "What's this?" I asked. He smiled. "The Foundation's next scholarship. I wanted you to sign it." I opened it and froze. The recipient's name, Margaret Reed Memorial Grant for students of mining engineering and family ethics. Family ethics. That phrase hit me harder than any judge's verdict ever could. "You came up with that?" I asked. Ryan nodded. "Catherine said our story proves that mining isn't just about pulling things from the earth. It's about finding what's buried in people too." I looked down at the stage where the miners' children sat in the front row, their faces glowing in the sunset. For the first time, I didn't see loss or regret. I saw legacy. Later that night, after the crowd dispersed, I stood alone by the ridge. The basin stretched out beneath the stars, quiet and infinite. Behind me, the lights of the new facility flickered like constellations drawn by human hands. And I realized something I wish I'd learned sooner. Money doesn't corrupt a man. It reveals him. Fame doesn't change a family. It magnifies what was already broken. And power is just a mirror. It shows you what's missing when you stop looking for love. So if you've made mistakes, if you've been betrayed, if your family feels like it's falling apart, don't bury your story, redeem it. Because that's what we did. Now before I go, let me leave you with this. If you've ever had to fight your own blood to keep your dignity or start over when everyone said you were finished, you already understand what it means to be rich. Wealth fades, titles fade, but the people who stand with you when everything else collapses, they're your true fortune. That's what this desert taught me. That's what my wife's faith taught me. And that's what my son finally learned. If this story touched, you don't just scroll away. Subscribe to Brian's Stories, share this video with someone who's been through their own family drama stories, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Because at the end of the day, family isn't about what you inherit. It's about what you build together. One act of forgiveness at a time. And maybe, just maybe, That's the richest story any of us will ever tell.